Welcome to ASCENDARA. Welcome to ASCENDARA. Welcome to ASCENDARA. Welcome to ASCENDARA. Welcome to ASCENDARA.
So welcome back to ASCENDARA. It's about 6:29 a.m. So this is way earlier than I normally would be recording this. I would much prefer to be doing something of a more creative. I can't say more creative, but let's just say something that has to do with more of me making music or some of the other things that I enjoy from a creative perspective. But I wanted to do this podcast episode or entry in a bit of a different manner than I've done the previous ones, and kind of go back to a format I used a while back on other ventures that, let's just say, floundered or didn't do so well in my eyes, right? And I wanted to do this entry based on the connection between trauma bonds, codependency, and the friend zone. Based on my experiences of people that I know that have went through it, and I really wanted to talk about that because perhaps it'll shed some light or provide some information for those who are interested in my opinion, my experiences, my facts, and those of others. And I really wanted to, for lack of a better words, have this conversation because I believe it's something important. I believe it's something that is a consistent issue. And I've been through it multiple times, and I think those who have people-pleasing tendencies will go through it multiple times until we learn the lesson. And then sometimes you can come from the other side. You know what I mean? And I think just overall, when you're dealing with trauma bonds, a lot of times it's subconscious. You don't realize, like, sometimes the bonds and friendships that you have with people are based strictly off of trauma, and that's it. And then once someone heals from that and they start moving forward, the relationship no longer exists. And then there's also codependency, which, involves a need for external validation and emotional enmeshment, or like it's basically you're teetering on a balance. You're connected with someone strictly because of the way you're dependent upon them. And then, of course, there's a friend zone, which, it can sometimes be a manifestation of deeper emotional wounds that are used against you. But before going to that part, or going through that, I should say, I think it's essential to start with trauma bonds. And trauma bonds are psychological attachments formed through cycles of reward and abuse. And usually earlier experiences shape attachment, meaning relationships with parents and guardians, family members, or out in society that cause trauma, which allows for there to be deep-rooted subconscious beliefs about the self, about life, about just everything encompassing a person. And therefore, you attract and are attracted to those same type of people. Now, this isn't, I just want to clearly state this isn't like this isn't a definition or to be defined in medical psychological terms or anything quote unquote official. I just want to clearly state that this is based off of multiple sources and how I'm defining it for the purpose of what I'm speaking about. But I will give you historical examples of this. some that I've researched, right? Like, even if you think of the Stockholm Syndrome case of 1973, where hostages formed emotional bonds with their captors, demonstrating how psychological survivor mechanisms can create deep attachments. So basically, when you're used to being abused, you become attached to the abuser because you feel like it's normal. You feel like, whatever's happening is, for lack of a better words, part of a day-to-day or everyday thing. So therefore, you don't see from the outside in or from the bigger picture standpoint what the actual issue is. So, for example, a child constantly abused by a parent may not see it as abuse because this is their parent and they're so used to it, and that's happened over years, over and over again. So they just feel like it's everyday stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? So I think it's essential to understand these type of things. And of course, I'm gonna give you another update, but it's definitely something to consider and something to think about. You know what I mean? And so therefore, it's like, think from a standpoint of understanding that, listen, sometimes we don't know what someone's going through, right? And we don't know how the things they're going through affects them. And I think it's very important to understand that, some people will reject you because you don't resemble their abuser or the abuses that they've went through in their life. It's just something that happens. And it's not for you to play victim. It's not for you to play high and mighty. It's not for you to play or to perceive yourself as better than or above. It's just something that does happen. And sometimes you're on the other side. You're on the other foot, right? Like sometimes, like I know something for me. I grew up in a single parent household. So my empathy and understanding of that allows me to have this delusion and false belief of me being empathetic to that situation or empathetic to people in that situation or women in that situation, I should say, and saying to myself like, well, this may not be ideal for me, but I'm willing to I'm willing to be a part of this, thinking that, it's almost like it's a duty, right? And it's not my place. It's not my place. It wasn't my decision. And I had to really tackle that within myself and say, you know what? Yeah, nah, that's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be a thing. But but it took me going through plenty of situations where realizing, like, for me, it's a trauma bond, and to correct that behavior, there has to be certain boundaries that are created for me to understand, like, yeah, no, like this isn't going to be a thing. And not saying that I would not be intimate or give those type of relationships a chance, but it's to understand when this person is not right for me. You know what I mean? Because there's emotional baggage that comes from that situation that puts you, in a tough spot. And then you have people that are manipulators and will see that empathy and see those things and not understand that they're subconsciously trying to manipulate you for their benefit. But yeah, beyond that, another historical example. that you can use or think about that would, I guess you could say, how can I put it? I guess you could say it could be a good example of that. And that would be Bonnie and Clyde. You know, Bonnie Parker's intense loyalty to Clyde Barrow, right? Despite their criminal lifestyle, suggests elements of trauma bonds formed through hardship and shared danger. You know what I mean? Some people mistake intensity for intimacy. You get what I'm saying? And the dynamics of friendships and romantic relationships sometimes are strictly based on the trauma. So the reason that's an example of that is because if, let's just say, you're put into a situation with someone, right? And you feel like they're the only person in this world that can understand what you're going through because it was you two that went through it. So you create a bond through those moments. Another example of that would be, if you have a friend group that you went through specific things with, you know what I mean? Whether it be danger, whatever the situation is, right? And it's a memory that forges a certain amount of glue with you and someone else, even if you and that person aren't meant to really be, close. If you and that person are on different paths in life, that one thing makes you feel as if, well, you're forever bonded with that person. And in some cases you are, as far as what actually happened. But the reality is that you still have to also consider what comes with that. Because sometimes we don't truly examine who people are, and what they may or may not bring to the table. Sometimes you really gotta look and ask yourself, like, yo, what are you actually gaining and getting, and what are they getting and gaining? And I think one of the biggest red flags for me personally is when I look at a situation, I have to ask myself, like, well, what did I get from this connection? And more often than not, the answer has always been really not much. Really not much. And, some of the friends I've had in the past, for me particularly, I realized that the bond wasn't necessarily strong. It wasn't built on a strong foundation. It was built off of memory. It was built off of things that had happened that forged a connection with these people, not really based on who we were as people from a non-biased standpoint. And I think that's just something that's very important to understand. And some people are karmic and meant to come in our life because there's lessons that we need to learn. And unfortunately, I think trauma bonds is a great, example of that. But moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about codependency. The need for validation and approval and self-worth through others, people-pleasing tendencies, and the fear of abandonment. And I think also as a artist, right? When you have you have like a fire and desire to be a professional, or to get into certain circles, or when you just know how things work, right? And what I mean by that is that if you understand how entertainment works, you understand how the world works, you realize like marketing is everything, relationships is everything. So what that does is it lends you, and this is just an example of that, it lends you to seeking validation outside of yourself. You're getting advice from people, you're doing consultations, you're doing all these things to be validated. And I think that causes codependency, especially in artists. And I think this also happens with, the basics of a lot of relationships. The the parent that never approved of anything you're doing, the other relative that's always criticizing you or criticizing your decision making because they can't understand. You'll have people saying all types of things about you. You'll have people literally that will see you taking a risk to make things happen and will attempt to manipulate how you see things and the decisions you're making for their validation to create codependency because they're codependent on you being codependent on them. Meaning, a lot of people will criticize you because they want you to feel as if their opinions matter. They'll criticize you because they need to be validated by feeling as if you're below them. And a lot of times they want you to cave to that pressure. My answer to that is fuck them. You know, that's just being truthful about it. Like, my answer to that is fuck them. Never seek outside validation, especially through unhealthy relationships or people that are unhealthy when you can see their behaviors as toxic or manipulative. Never seek that. You know what I mean? Never feel like you need approval, and never allow your quote-unquote self-worth to come through other people. That's what allows for gaslighting, projecting, and all these things that I want to get into at another point really deeper. But before going there, we're getting to that point, I just want to give some like historical examples. So in the 1800s, you can look at Queen Victoria and John Brown. So after the death of Prince Albert, Queen Victoria developed an emotionally dependent relationship with her servant, John Brown. There is speculation that she relied on him for emotional stability, which is a hallmark of codependency. So even when, you develop relationships with people, you have to ask yourself, what's the basis of the relationship? Why does it exist? You know what I mean? And sometimes it's the unseen. Sometimes, you think you're being a good person, right? And all you're doing is stopping people from their lessons. You're making them emotionally dependent. You get what I'm saying? It's unfortunately a slippery slope. And more often than not, we're in codependent relationships. More often than we're aware of. And it goes under the guise of family, friend, best friend, whatever. And sometimes we really got to look at ourselves and say, well, damn, okay, why am I here? Once again, even if this is an even give and take, what are we giving and taking to each other? Are we independent of each other and have a friendship, or are there things that we're relying on? I'm not even talking about business relationships, but personal relationships. And I think it's a good thing to examine within yourself, especially when dealing with the people in your life. And unfortunately, more often than not, once you realize these things, there's a lot of people that may no longer be in your life. But move forward. Another example would be the case of Marilyn Monroe, and her relationships with like powerful men, whether it be JFK, Joe DiMaggio, Arthur Miller, blah, 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 blah. And also it like just looking at those dynamics, it often showed patterns of codependency. She, and, from just let's just say, historical lens, right? Because I wasn't there. She sought validation through romantic attachments, and you see trauma bonds and codependency can feed into each other. You know what I mean? And it's an unfortunate thing, but it it could be both of those things as the glue and the foundation of a friendship or relationship, and that's what causes it to exist. That's the reason why it's there in the first place. Is because of that. It's not there because of other things that are genuine. It is strictly there because of the trauma bond is there because of the codependency, and it all goes together. It's like one unfortunate mixing pot. You know what I mean? And more often than not, it ends up being, a struggle of one-sided emotional labor. One person's doing the heavy lifting and the other one isn't. And unfortunately, it happens. I've been through it, and I know a lot of other people have been through it. But it's something to be mindful of. And you really got to ask yourself, like, well, what are the dynamics of this relationship or the potential of it? And I think, some people, some people use trauma bonds and codependency to create a manipulation or a manipulative circumstance for people. And I think it's just something to be aware of. But taking that one-sided emotional labor and bringing it into the friend zone, right? And this is a slippery slope. Because I think some people don't even understand the friend zone and how it's manipulative, and why it's not a good thing, and why in a lot of ways it's unhealthy, and it's unhealed trauma and a bunch of other things that go into it. And often codependency and trauma bonds is one of the greatest existences or reasoning for the friend zones, because often someone's in the friend zone or someone's put in the friend zone for manipulative means, not authentic means, especially if the dynamics of the relationship is being changed to benefit one person and not the other. But let's go into some historical examples of that. So, one of the first historical examples of that would be F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald. So initially, Zelda rejected F. Scott Fitzgerald, seeing him as just a friend while he obsessed over her. He continued to pursue her despite the imbalance, showcasing an early example of emotionally one-sided relationship dynamics. So, long story short, if you ever been the guy pursuing the woman that you felt is of your dreams, the love of your life, the woman that you feel most attached to, or you're like, this is the woman I trust and care about and who I want to grow with, but it's not being reciprocated. And she recognizes that you're doing all these things for her. She knows it's not right, but she's benefiting. So she can't completely shut you out, and she'll do little things to slightly keep the door open. Or better yet, to keep you with a window view. So she's going to get into relationships in front of you that are going to be unhealthy for her, knowing that you'll comfort her when they're done, when, she's physically intimate with someone else or uses someone else. No one gets hurting you. No one gets hurting you. Knowing that, is bringing you pain. And, there's plenty of reasons for that, which I think at some point I'll go into, but she would knowingly and willingly allow you to indulge in this one-sided dynamic. And we'll see you hurt, right? And still say, but we could be friends though. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want anyone as a friend that I'm doing everything for. I don't want anyone as a friend that isn't bringing me any value. You see, I think like for me personally, right? I look at things and understand that just because I'm inspired by someone, it doesn't mean they're bringing anything to my life of true value, because I can inspire myself. And I think for me, I've been in situations where people believed because they inspired me or because at a moment of time they made me feel a certain way that, they were providing more value than they actually were. And I'm guilty of that because in a lot of ways I've allowed them to think that way. But it's not the case. And, and I've been in that guy in the F. Scott Fitzgerald's position where, I'm trying to show someone that I'm interested, not realizing like they know I'm interested. But everything else I'm providing for them, allows them to seek other things elsewhere. Because they can go be with someone who's an abuser or, who's not going to do all the things that they want, right? But still have me to emotionally comfort them or do the things that are going to make them feel good, even if it's draining me. It's like the equivalent of someone who can see you on your deathbed, right? But as long as you're giving them energy, they're going to keep you alive just as much as they can to continue to give them energy, because that's what they're thriving off of. It's a fucked up thing. But in my opinion, that's the friend zone. All right, so another historical example, the letters of Beethoven's immortal beloved. So Beethoven wrote passionate letters to an unnamed woman who may or may not have reciprocated his affections, showing how, he had deep emotional longing. And sometimes it can be, misplaced in one-sided attachments. You see, unhealed trauma and codependency lead people to accept unreciprocated love. And a lot of times it's hard to understand that. And I think for men in particular, because, we are taught not to be vulnerable. When we are vulnerable, we take it extremely personal when that's taken for granted. And I think a lot of women don't understand that. You see, before you allow, and let's just say, not even just men, let's just say anyone in general, before you allow someone to be vulnerable with you, ask yourself, do you understand what they're giving you? Because a lot of times we take for granted when someone's opening themselves up, and then we try to project and deflect onto them when we're up, when we want to change the dynamic of the relationship and we don't understand why they're upset. And I think that's something that we've got to understand, because that's what creates the toxicity in what bond that used to exist. And then we're wondering why, people feel away or they look at us a certain way or why they don't want to be part of our lives, And I think, I hate to say like self-worth or anything like that, but inward validation, in my opinion, is what helps us break free from these patterns. And we have to respect boundaries in others and in ourselves, and recognize when relationships are not meant to be romantic or not meant to be certain ways. But we also have to understand when our perception right? Our perception of these things is also based off of, I want to say, in my opinion, sometimes we also don't create relationships because we're afraid of how it's going to change us. Sometimes we're afraid of how the correct people in our lives are different from whatever it is we were used to. Meaning, if we're in relationships that weren't so great, right? When we meet someone who challenges us to be better, do better, and grow, a lot of times we run from that because we're uncomfortable. And I think for the most part, we don't recognize when that is an opportunity to heal and grow. And a lot of times, the person that can help us heal and grow, we reject them in a certain way and try to still keep them in our lives. But then when they reject us back, we feel away and we play victim. It's really an interesting dynamic if you truly think about it. But I want to kind of conclude this. I don't even like doing, I don't even like doing these entries or podcasts that long. But one thing is we got to take accountability. We got to learn to self-soothe, build internal validation, understand ourselves, set boundaries, respect boundaries, create boundaries, and overcome toxic patterns. And, an example of that would be Eleanor Roosevelt. You know, she transformed herself after an emotionally dependent relationship with her mother and husband, focusing on personal growth and activism, and rather than seeking validation from others. And I think you should look more into her. Obviously, a more recent example would be Prince Harry and Meghan Markle publicly stepping away from the royal family dynamic because of toxic things. And it was just like setting an example of breaking generational cycles and curses and prioritizing well-being. And I think one of the main things is like healthy communication and emotional dependence matter. You gotta have power in choosing yourself over others and walking away from unhealthy dynamics, and reflect on your own personal experiences and growth. You get what I'm saying? And just really, really close out cycles for yourself and understand why you feel the way you feel, why things trigger you, why people trigger you, and I think also understanding the motives of relationships and people that you're dealing with, and kind of understand when what, this situation is based off of these things that are not healthy for me. You know what I mean? And I would, as fucked up as it sounds, I would encourage you cutting off anyone that creates an unhealthy dynamic for you, and truly be self-aware. Truly embody self-love, and I don't mean ego love. I mean self-love. Well, I think I'm gonna get into that at some point. And yeah, man. So at the conclusion of this, I felt the need to talk about these things because it was something I personally went through and immediately on my mind when I woke up. And I felt like I needed to, at the very least, speak about it. This is very surface level to me. It could have went deeper, but I just wanted to bring it to the forefront of my mind, where I stand and how I'm looking at things. And I just hope it helps somebody. You get what I'm saying? But with that being said, I'll see y'all next time. Make sure y'all subscribe, share. Let me know what y'all think. And I hope you enjoyed this. Peace and love.
Welcome to